In the narrow streets of Manila, where laughter mixes with the sound of traffic and rain, a young Filipino man named Rico Dela Cruz grew up in a world that didn't give him much, but gave him music. His family lived in a small, crumbling apartment with walls so thin you could hear the neighbors argue and the dogs bark at night. His father, once a guitarist in a local band, had given up his dream years ago after life became about paying bills instead of chasing songs. But even when times were hard, he never stopped humming Elvis Presley tunes around the house. Rico grew up listening to his father strumming an old, faded guitar as his mother sang softly while cooking rice. Music became the family's escape from the noise of reality. Rico didn't have toys or gadgets. What he had was a voice that could make people stop what they were doing and listen. By the time he was 12, he could sing Elvis songs so naturally that even old men at the corner store called him the Little Elvis of Manila. But deep down, Rico never thought much of it. He sang because it made him feel alive, not because he thought he could ever stand on a real stage. Still, when his mother showed him a video of America's Got Talent one night, she smiled and said, "Maybe one day, you'll be there, my son." Rico laughed, shaking his head. "Ma, that's America," he said, almost embarrassed. "That's not for people like us." But something about the way his mother looked at him that night made him believe, just a little. Her eyes said what her words didn't. She knew he was special. As the years went on, life became harder. His father's health declined, and Rico took on small jobs to help. He washed dishes, sold fruit on the street, and sang at cheap karaoke bars where people barely paid attention. But no matter how exhausted he was, every night before sleeping, he'd sing an Elvis song. It wasn't about pretending to be someone else, it was about remembering who he was. The music gave him courage, hope, and a dream that felt just out of reach. One evening, after a long shift at a restaurant, Rico sat on the rooftop of their building, looking at the stars. He thought about the life waiting beyond the ocean, about the dream he had buried beneath work and responsibility. He closed his eyes and whispered to himself, "If Elvis could come from nowhere and make it, maybe I can too." That night, he made a decision that would change everything. He would save every peso he could. He didn't know how long it would take or what he'd do once he got there, but he was going to America. The following months were a blur of long hours and sleepless nights. Rico worked 2 jobs, sang at weddings for tips, and ate the cheapest food to save money. When he finally had enough to buy a one-way ticket, he held the paper in his hands like it was gold. Saying goodbye to his parents was the hardest part. His mother hugged him tightly and whispered, "Don't forget where you came from." His father, too weak to stand, handed him the same old guitar he'd played since Rico was a child. "Take this," he said, his voice trembling, "and make it sing where I never could." When Rico landed in Los Angeles, the air smelled different, fresh, strange, full of possibility. He didn't know anyone, didn't have a plan, and had only $50 left after paying for the cab. But he felt alive in a way he never had before. He stayed with a kind Filipino family who gave him a small room and a chance to perform at their restaurant on weekends. Night after night, he sang to small crowds who clapped politely, until one night, something changed. A woman in the audience recorded his version of "Can't Help Falling in Love" and uploaded it online. The video spread like wildfire, millions of people mesmerized by the humble young man with the soulful Elvis voice. A few days later, while cleaning tables after his set, Rico's phone buzzed. It was an email from America's Got Talent. "You were invited to audition," it said. Rico stood frozen, staring at the words, his heart racing. Everything he had dreamed of was no longer a dream. It was real. The night before the audition, Rico could barely sleep. The small room he rented was quiet, but his mind was loud with thoughts. What if he forgot the lyrics? What if they laughed at his accent? What if Simon Cowell didn't even let him finish? He sat by the window, holding his father's guitar, the one that carried so many memories. He ran his fingers across the strings, whispering a prayer in Tagalog, asking for courage. His mother called him from Manila, her face flickering through the screen. She smiled, even though he could see the tears in her eyes. "You are already a winner to us, Anik," she said softly. "Don't sing for the judges. Sing for the little boy who used to dream on our rooftop." Her words stayed in his heart long after the call ended. When morning came, the city of Los Angeles felt different. The air buzzed with excitement as he arrived at the AGT studio. Contestants crowded the backstage area, some stretching, some rehearsing, others pacing nervously. Rico felt like he didn't belong among them. He wore a second-hand suit he had bought from a thrift store, his shoes slightly too big, his guitar case scratched from years of travel. Still, when his name was called, he took a deep breath, straightened his shoulders, and walked toward the stage. The bright lights nearly blinded him as he stepped out in front of thousands of people. The judges' table glowed beneath the spotlights: Simon Cowell, Heidi Klum, Howie Mandel, and Sofia Vergara. Simon looked at him curiously. "What's your name?" Simon asked, his voice calm but sharp. "Rico Dela Cruz," he answered, his accent thick but clear. "And where are you from?" "From the Philippines, sir." Simon nodded. "All right, Rico. What are you going to do for us today?" He smiled nervously. "I'll sing a song by Elvis Presley." A small ripple of laughter went through the audience. Rico could feel his throat tighten, but then he remembered his mother's words. He closed his eyes, gripped the guitar, and began. The first notes of "Can't Help Falling in Love" came out softly, almost like a whisper. The room went quiet. His voice carried something raw, something no imitation could copy. Every lyric trembled with emotion, like it was being pulled straight from his soul. By the time he reached the second verse, people began to sway in their seats. Some took out their phones. The song grew, each word stronger than the last. Simon leaned forward, his expression changing from polite curiosity to genuine awe. When Rico hit the final line, "Take my hand, take my whole life too," his voice cracked slightly, and the room erupted in applause. Rico opened his eyes, his heart pounding. The audience was on their feet. Heidi clapped above her head, smiling wide. Sophia said, "That was pure, that was beautiful." Howie nodded, saying, "You didn't just sing Elvis. You made us feel Elvis." Simon sat still for a moment, his eyes locked on Rico. Then he smiled. "I wasn't expecting that," he said quietly. "That was incredible." And before Rico could even process what was happening, Simon reached over and slammed the golden buzzer. The sound of the buzzer filled the auditorium, and golden confetti began to rain from above. Rico dropped to his knees, his face in his hands, overwhelmed by emotion. The crowd was cheering, people were crying, and the judges stood clapping. He could barely breathe as he looked up, watching the gold pieces fall like blessings. Simon walked up to him, placed a hand on his shoulder, and said, "You have something very special, Rico. That wasn't an impression, it was from your heart." Backstage, Rico was surrounded by other contestants, crew members, and even strangers congratulating him. He called his mother immediately, holding back tears as she answered. She was already crying, shouting, "You did it. You did it, my son." The video of his performance went viral overnight. People around the world shared it, calling him the Filipino Elvis, and the voice that made Simon cry. But Rico didn't feel like a superstar. He sat alone later that night, guitar in hand, staring at the confetti still stuck to his shoes. He thought about his small home in Manila, about his father's old guitar, and about the dream that had carried him across oceans. For the first time in his life, he realized something powerful: this was only the beginning. The next morning, Rico woke up to a world that no longer felt the same. His phone wouldn't stop ringing, calls, messages, and endless notifications. The video of his golden buzzer performance had exploded online, spreading faster than he could ever imagine. It was everywhere: YouTube, Facebook, TV news, and radio stations. People called him the Filipino Elvis, the voice that made Simon cry, and even the soul from Manila. He scrolled through the comments, his hands shaking, unable to believe how many people around the world had been touched by his voice. "You made me cry," one comment said. "Elvis would be proud of you," another read. Rico felt a lump in his throat. He never expected his small dream to reach millions of hearts. When he called his mother, she was surrounded by neighbors who had all crowded into their tiny home to watch his video again and again. They clapped and cheered when his face appeared on screen, their pride louder than any applause. "Your father's smiling from heaven," his mother said softly, tears falling down her cheeks. Rico promised to make them proud again. But he also knew that with the finals coming soon, he couldn't just rely on emotion. He needed to give the performance of a lifetime. Days turned into weeks of rehearsals. The producers suggested big stage setups, backup singers, and flashy lights, but Rico refused most of it. He wanted to stay simple, raw, and true to himself. Elvis didn't need glitter to move hearts, he told them. Instead, he focused on his connection to the music. Every night, he practiced alone in his small room, singing until his voice cracked, pushing himself to feel every word. During those quiet hours, he often thought about home, the noise of Manila, his father's guitar, and the way his mother always believed in him even when the world didn't. As the day of the final performance approached, Rico felt both nervous and grateful. He had come so far from the boy who sang on rooftops. The night of the finale, the stage looked enormous. The crowd filled every seat, and cameras glowed like stars. Rico walked onto the stage dressed in a simple white suit with a small Philippine flag pin on his chest. He stood there quietly, the spotlight wrapping around him like a halo. The audience waited. Simon nodded for him to begin. The music started, Elvis Presley's "If I Can Dream." Rico's voice was soft at first, trembling with emotion. "There must be lights burning brighter somewhere," the words carried across the room, raw and powerful. He wasn't just performing, he was testifying. Every note carried the story of his struggles, his parents' sacrifices, and the thousands of Filipinos watching from halfway across the world. The camera zoomed in as tears welled in his eyes. He sang not for fame, but for hope, for everyone who had ever felt small but dared to dream anyway. As the song built toward its final chorus, the audience began to rise to their feet. The orchestra swelled, lights brightened, and Rico poured everything he had left into the final line. "While I can think, while I can talk, while I can stand, while I can walk." His voice cracked with emotion as he finished, "While I can dream, please let my dream come true." The room exploded in applause. Everyone stood. Some people cried openly. Simon Cowell himself was on his feet, clapping slowly, his eyes misty. When the noise died down, Simon spoke softly into the microphone. "Rico, what you did tonight was more than music. You reminded us what it means to believe again." The judges praised him, calling his performance one of the most heartfelt moments in the show's history. Rico didn't win first place that night, but it didn't matter. He walked off the stage smiling, holding his guitar close. The world already knew his name. When he returned home to Manila months later, crowds filled the airport, waving flags and singing his name. Reporters surrounded him, but he kept his head down, tears in his eyes. He walked straight to his old neighborhood, where his mother waited at the doorway of their small house. She hugged him tightly, whispering, "You did it." Rico smiled and looked up at the sky, thinking of his father. He had gone to America with nothing but a dream, and he came back with something far greater, the love of millions and the proof that even the smallest voices can echo across the world.